the subdivision sprouted in the middle of Daniel Harper's pasture like a rash he hadn't asked for. From his spot on the ridge, where an old split rail fence marked the line of the original homestead, he could see rooftops glittering under the afternoon sun, shingles neat and uniform. The houses were all the same shape, beige boxes with vinyl siding and stone veneers meant to suggest wealth without ever quite reaching it. They had matching driveways, matching garage doors, even matching ornamental trees stuck into squares of turf so green it looked dyed. 96 homes in perfect rows, each one stamped with the Maple Creek Homeowners Association's logo, each one sitting squarely on his land. He leaned against the fence post, a length of straw rolling idly between his teeth, and squinted. The contractors were finishing up the last of the development. He could hear the tap of hammers, the faint whine of saws, the hollered directions of foremen whose necks burned red under the sun. From here, the subdivision looked like an army encampment, rows of tents raised against the natural order of the fields and creeks they'd buried under asphalt. Daniel Harper didn't raise hell when the bulldozers came. He didn't stand in front of them waving a shotgun like some of his neighbors might have done. He simply nodded when the construction crews passed by, pretended to be another relic of the countryside too stubborn or too old to matter. The developers looked through him the way city men look at trees. Just part of the scenery. He had become invisible, which suited him fine. What none of them had done. Not the developers, not the county inspectors who rubber-stamped their permits, not the HOA president in his Chris Cactus, was check the deed books carefully. They'd bought parcels around his land, bits and pieces from people eager for quick money, and assumed his acreage was part of the haul. But Harper's plot wasn't just a patchwork square lost to history. His great-grandfather had homesteaded it in 1894, filed the papers himself with the county clerk, and the Harpers had paid taxes on it every year since. Daniel had the documents tucked away in a fireproof box, each generation adding signatures, notarizations, and stamps. And when the survey lines were drawn for Maple Creek subdivision, something delicious happened. The engineers, working off the developers' faulty assumptions, laid out their roads and cul-de-sacs neatly inside Harper's boundaries. 96 cookie-cutter homes, a clubhouse, a pool, and a playground. All of it, every inch of it, on land Daniel Harper still owned. He chuckled to himself whenever he thought about it. Let them build. Let them pave. Let them pour concrete until the ground couldn't breathe. Every day they built, they sank more of their money into his property. They put down roots in soil that didn't belong to them. Once in a while they president, tall, broad-shouldered, perpetually sunburned, would march up to the construction sites like a king inspecting his domain. Daniel had seen him, tie loosened, phone glued to his ear, barking orders about irrigation systems and fencing height restrictions. The man carried himself like Maple Creek already belonged to him. Once, when their paths crossed at the edge of the hill, the president had looked Daniel up and down, his lip curling with faint disdain. "You'll want to keep your cattle off the development road," the man had said, voice oiled with false courtesy. "We've had complaints from the contractors." Daniel had tipped his hat, nodded once, and said, "Not a problem." He didn't mention that the road itself cut straight across his pasture, laid without permission. He didn't mention that the HOA was technically trespassing every time they set foot on it. Instead, he gave the same slow smile he'd perfected over the years, one that never quite reached his eyes. Let them think he was harmless. The more invisible he became, the more intricate the trap they wove around themselves. By the time the subdivision neared completion, families began moving in. Daniel watched the first U-Haul rattle down the new asphalt, watched children tumble out of SUVs holding soccer balls and scooters, watched women carry in boxes marked kitchen while men fiddled with garage door openers. He could hear dogs barking, see barbecue smoke rising from backyards that used to be wildflower fields. On Sundays, he could hear the laughter echoing from the pool they dug where his cattle used to drink. On weeknights, the glow of 96 porch lights lit up the valley, drowning out the stars. Maple Creek was alive, bustling, proud of its new order. To its residents, Harper was just the strange old man on the ridge, a curiosity who refused to sell. Some of them might gossip about at HO meetings but never take seriously. He didn't mind. In fact, he liked it. Every mortgage they signed was another nail in the coffin of their illusion. Every fence they planted, every HO fee they collected, was a reminder that they'd built a kingdom on sand. Once, a young couple had walked up the ridge, waving cheerfully, perhaps hoping to charm him. "Beautiful place you've got here," the man had said, sweat beading on his forehead as he pointed toward Daniel's weathered farmhouse. "You should come to one of our HOA barbecues. Good way to meet the neighbors." Daniel had leaned on his fence, silent for a long moment, before replying, "Appreciate the invite. Might do that." He hadn't gone, of course. But he remembered the way they looked at him, kindly but dismissively, as if he were an artifact, a relic from the past they could safely ignore. It was all part of the game. The subdivision thrived, but Daniel's land remained untouched. His farmhouse weather, beaten but solid, his fields sparse but free of their manicured tyranny. He would sit on his porch at dusk, sipping black coffee, and listen to the distant echoes of lawnmowers, barking dogs, and laughter. He let them think they'd won. But under his calm exterior, Daniel carried the secret like a blade. He was the true owner of Maple Creek, the soil, the foundations, the very ground under their children's feet. The developers had handed him a fortune without realizing it. 96 houses worth of investments, and all he had to do was wait. And Daniel Harper was very, very good at waiting. The courthouse was packed tighter than a Sunday church service. 96 homeowners filled the gallery, sweating under the fluorescent lights, their whispers rising and falling like a nervous tide. They clutched papers, letters, mortgages, HOA notices, anything that might tether them to the lives they thought they'd built. The HO board sat in the front row, stiff-backed and fuming, their lawyers shuffling through thick binders crammed with contracts and glossy photographs of neatly manicured lawns. The developers weren't there. Those men had made their money and vanished long ago. It was the homeowners who had to face the storm. At the defense table, the lead attorney stood tall, his suit sharp enough to cut glass. He tapped his pen against the table in a rhythm that spoke of annoyance. To his right, the HO president sat with his jaw clenched, arms folded across his chest, cheeks flushed crimson as if the entire matter were beneath him. Their posture told the story they wanted the judge to believe. This was a misunderstanding, a truth by an eccentric farmer who didn't understand the modern world. Then there was Daniel Harper. He sat alone at the plaintiff's table, hat resting in his lap, boots scuffed and dusty, a quiet figure against the polished backdrop of the courtroom. He had no lawyer, no army of clerks, no binders of evidence spread before him. Just a single folded document in his hand. Worn soft from a century of careful passing, edges yellowed like autumn leaves. He waited patient as ever, eyes steady on the bench. Judge Morales, stern and deliberate, entered with the bailiff's call and settled into her chair. Her gaze swept across the room before resting on Daniel. Mr. Harper, you filed a claim that the land upon which the Maple Creek subdivision sits belongs to you. That's a serious claim. Do you have any evidence? The HOA attorney jumped in before Daniel could move, his voice slick with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this is a frivolous claim. The Maple Creek development has been established for years. Homes have been purchased, mortgages signed, taxes paid. Our clients, hardworking families, are being harassed by this man who refuses to accept progress. We will prove he has no standing and no rightful claim to the land. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. Heads nodded. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Another man muttered angrily under his breath. They believed the lad to. Their lives, their savings, their children's futures were tied up in his words. Daniel didn't argue. He stood slowly, walked forward, and handed the folded document to the clerk. His boots echoed faintly against the tiled floor, a sound that carried far in the tense silence. When he returned to his seat, the judge spread the document open carefully, the brittle paper whispering like dry leaves. Her eyes scanned the text, line after line, her brow lifting ever so slightly, county seals stamped in faded ink, names in looping cursive, signatures stretching back generations. Chain of title unbroken, tax records attached. It wasn't a copy, it wasn't a photocopy from some dusty archive. It was the original, still alive with the ink of men long dead. This deed, Judge Morales said at last, her voice firm, is valid. It is current. And it establishes that the land in question, every acre comprising the Maple Creek division, remains in the legal possession of Mr. Harper. The room erupted. Gasps shot through the gallery, some loud enough to echo. A woman near the back cried out, "No, no, that can't be right." Another man shot to his feet, pointing furiously toward Daniel. "You can't do this to us. We paid for our homes." The bailiff barked for order, hand near his holster, as the room rolled with panic. The HOA attorney sputtered, his face paling as he shuffled desperately through his binder. "Your Honor, this must be a clerical error. The county approved our permits. The development was cleared." The county, the judge interrupted, her tone sharp, approved permits on the assumption that the developers owned the land. They did not. This deed is clear. The developers built without right, and your clients purchased property that was never theirs to buy. The HO president surged to his feet, sweat gleaming on his forehead. This is absurd. That man is a recluse, a nobody. He can't just walk in here and take over slowly, placing his hat back on his head, his gaze level and unflinching. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I didn't take anything. You all built it on my soil. I let you. I watched you raise your homes, pave your streets, pour your concrete. Figured you'd appreciate it more when you found out it really belonged to." His words settled over the courtroom like dust. Heavy. Inescapable. A young mother clutched her baby tighter, whispering frantic questions to her husband. An older man dropped his head into his hands. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably, their confidence cracking. Years of polished lawns and strict rules, of fines for improper mailbox paint and late fees for unmowed grass, crumbled into dust under the weight of that single deed. The judge's gavel struck hard against the wood. Order. This court finds that the Maple Creek subdivision, including all homes, roads, and common areas, lies on property owned by Mr. Daniel Harper. This decision is final. The sound echoed like thunder, silencing the room. For a long moment no one moved. The homeowners sat in stunned disbelief, caught between rage and despair. Some looked at Daniel with pleading eyes, as if mercy could be bargained for. Others glared at him with hatred, the kind that could curdle into something dangerous. But Daniel Harper didn't flinch. He stood there, hat in hand once more, his expression unreadable. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't smirking. He simply looked like a man who had waited patiently for his due, and finally, after years of silence, collected it. The HO president muttered curses under his breath, turning away as if to escape the humiliation. The attorney began arguing again, but his words fell hollow. The deed was ironclad. The subdivision, the homes, the pool, even the sidewalks. They were all his. As the bailiff called for adjournment, Daniel turned toward the gallery, meeting the eyes of the families who sat there. Some looked away. Some stared at him as if he were a villain out of an old tale. But Daniel didn't waver. He had given them time, given them silence, given them the illusion that they were masters of their domain. Now the truth was laid bare. When he walked out of the courtroom, the air outside was bright, the sky wide and endless over the city. Behind him, voices spilled from the courthouse doors, angry, frightened, disbelieving. But Daniel Harper walked with the same slow, steady steps he always had, as though he had all the time in the world. Because he did.